right,
Okay.
so Zoe is a compassionate career coach who creates space for individuals to explore their career goals and potential. Navigating her own career journey allowed Zoe to develop a broader understanding of the challenges career change and exploration presents. She provides individuals with the understanding and support they need to be successful, and her coaching focuses on building effective tools for job searching, developing soft skills, and building confidence. Zoe's educational background is in psychology, career development, practicing, and adult education. Professionally, she has worked with individuals from varying backgrounds, from healthcare to hospitality to media, arts, and most recently trades and technology. So, and you're currently working at General Assembly, which I know you touched on. But I'll let you kind of, if there's anything else you want to add to that. If anybody has any questions, please place them in the career chat. I'm also just going to write a note in there just because I know a lot of people are probably just logging off and will be trickling over and they missed my intro. So, and it's also good if you want to share any links or anything like that in the chat there. So I'm going to leave. I'll be back at the end. And thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, Rachel. Hi, everyone. So like Rachel said, I'm a career coach with General Assembly at our Toronto campus. We are a global company originating from New York, but we're across the States, Australia, UK, Paris, Saudi Arabia, Singapore, pretty wide reach. I specifically am currently working with our software engineering program and our UX design program, but in the past I've worked with Employment Ontario, so I've helped people across all industries, healthcare, trades, technology, hospitality, tourism, anything that you can think of. I've probably helped someone out with getting into that field. So lots of different industries. So today I'm going to be talking about behavioral interviews, what you need to do in order to prepare, best practices, how to structure your answers and make sure that you're delivering the best answers that you can. Obviously, interviews can be pretty nerve-wracking, but there's a lot of different ways that we can prepare. Awesome, I see that you're a software engineer. That's super cool to see. Hopefully some of this helps you out then, and for everyone. But yeah, so we're going to be talking about the STAR method, which is so important for answering these questions, and we'll look at some examples as well so that you can kind of see the breakdown of what it is that people are listening for when you are answering these behavioral interview questions. So what even are these questions? So the interviewer will ask you to recall a past experience and then walk them through how you handled this experience. So these are used to assess your soft skills, to figure out, how you actually work through those situations, what kind of skills you utilize to work through them, and just how you navigate like everyday situations in the workplace. An example that's here is, tell us about a time that you were asked to do something you had never done before. How did you react and what did you learn? We'll come back to this question a little bit later on, but let's take a look at some examples. So first one being, and I'm going to break it down again for you, what it is that they're actually listening for when you hear some of these questions. So the first one here being, tell me about a time when you had to adjust to a colleague's working style in order to complete a project. So here we're looking at, a situation where maybe you don't have the same working style as your colleague, you're paired together to work on a project, you're working towards a deadline, and like your working styles just aren't matching up, and sometimes that can cause a little bit of a challenge in terms of moving forward with the project, reaching deadlines, communicating appropriately. So what recruiters and hiring managers and interviewers are listening for is your adaptability, your flexibility, ability to reflect on what was learned, your teamwork, and your collaboration. So when you're answering, you want to make sure that you're highlighting like what was the situation, you're highlighting how you figured out and worked through getting to understand this person's working style, getting to understand your own working style, and then how did you communicate and collaborate together to reach a common goal? So whether that was the deadline or coming up with a creative idea, whatever the task at hand is, how did you overcome that obstacle, communicate with your partner, work together, and then make sure that you were successful with the work that you were doing in the end. So this is what the recruiters are listening for, and they want to hear all of those pieces in your answer. Another example is, can you tell us about a time that you had a project dramatically shift direction at the last minute? What did you do? So Say you're working with a client and last minute they're like, you know what, I'm not feeling this direction. Can we actually do something different? And you're like, the deadline is tomorrow. What do? So what they're listening for is focus on keeping the project on track to meet the deadline, comfort in seeking assistance when needed, and communication. So what kind of resources can you rely on? Who can you lean on? Who can you ask for help? And employers really listen for that, because they listen for people who are humble and humility and are able to turn and say, like, you know what, like, I'm a little bit in over my head, something's changed, I could use some support. They want to know that the people that they're hiring are going to be okay with asking for assistance when they need it and not letting things slip and not feeling too overwhelmed. They want to make sure that you're working as part of a team whenever it is that you need to. The last one that we're looking at is, tell me about a time you had to juggle several projects at the same time. How did you organize your time and what was the result? So again, describing the situation and making sure that you walk them through the steps that you took, and describing, you know, your clear proactive process for organization. So if that means using to-do lists, confirming the deadlines, blocking time to make sure that your calendar isn't being filled up with other meeting requests or anything like that from other people. They're looking for the success in meeting all of the deadlines no matter what, and hearing about what it took for you to meet that. Next, we're going to look at understanding questions as opportunities. So when you're in an interview, for example, if you have, tell me about a time when you had a project or initiative that you worked on that was unsuccessful. This can be a really uncomfortable question to answer, because someone's asking you to describe a time that you weren't successful, a time that you failed, a time that something went wrong, a time that you probably aren't super proud of. But it happens to all of us, and that's also what they're listening for you to be able to admit that, you know, sometimes things don't go the way that we want, sometimes they don't go as planned, and how did you pivot and learn from that? So this is an opportunity to show that you are self-reflective and self-aware, have a sense of personal responsibility, and learn from this experience. So that's the first thing that they listen for, and that's the first opportunity in questions like that. Second, you want to make sure that you allow yourself to be vulnerable. That's what they're listening for too. Can this person admit to mistakes? Can they admit to faults? Can they, you know, self-reflect and grow from the experience? Explain how you took responsibility and ownership, what it is that you learned, and how you turned that negative experience into a positive. So the end result might not be a positive result, obviously, because they say, tell us about a time something was unsuccessful. But the positive in your answer is what you learned and what you changed and what you knew to do moving forward. And if you come across that situation again, you already learned from the prior experience and you know how to navigate that situation really gracefully. The last part is, don't avoid the question by saying that you've never worked on an unsuccessful project. So whether you get this question or you get the question about weaknesses or about a time that you failed, anything like that, they don't want to hear, I've never worked on anything unsuccessful. I have no weaknesses. Nothing has ever failed for me. I've never missed a deadline, anything like that. We're human. These things happen. Sometimes it's not our fault. Sometimes it's unavoidable. Things change last minute. We make mistakes, we're only human, right? So what they're looking for is for you to not place blame on other people, to be really honest. Don't be self-deprecating. Don't feel a sense of shame about the experience. Everyone has done them. I promise you the person that's interviewing you has had one of these situations happen too. Don't be too hard on yourself, but definitely don't blame others on your team, and make sure that you're honest about it. And the most important part and the biggest opportunity in this answer for you is to share what it is that you learned and what kind of skills came out of this at the end. Okay, really important one. At any point, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to throw some in the chat. I'd be happy to answer some. So what if you don't understand the question during your interview? A couple of ways that you can go about this. So of course, ask them to repeat it. Maybe you just misheard them. Who knows? Maybe it wasn't said clearly. Ask them to clarify parts of it. Don't try and answer the question if you're not 100% sure what it is that they're asking, because you're gonna start, stop, maybe stumble on it, maybe provide an answer that isn't as good as the answer you would have provided if you knew exactly what it was that they were asking. You definitely want to make sure that you're clarifying parts of it. Ask for more details or ask more questions about the question or situation so that you are 100% confident you know what it is that they're asking. If you're halfway through your answer and you can't remember the second part, some of those questions that we looked at as examples had a couple different parts to them. So if you get like halfway through your answer and you're like, I think there was something else, can't totally remember, how do I go back? Just ask them. It's totally okay. They'll just read the question to you again, and you can continue on with your answer and make sure that you don't miss anything. And of course, don't lie if you're not sure. You don't want to get yourself into a situation where you're kind of running around trying to find an answer, or trying to, make one up or whatever it is. Just ask them for more information and ask for some clarifications so that you can provide the best answer. Awesome. So how do we actually answer behavioral interview questions? Using the STAR method. So I've kind of started to touch on this a little bit already when I was talking through the examples and identifying, situation, task. I mentioned that a couple times. So when you get any of those questions where they're asking you to describe an experience to them, you have to make sure that you're hitting these 4 points in your answer. So first, what is the situation that you're describing to them? In some of the questions, it's very clear. We looked at one earlier that was like, tell us about a time that you had to work with someone whose working style was unlike yours. The situation is that the two of you maybe aren't getting along that well, or your working styles are very different. So describe the situation in full detail. What were the circumstances and what was the challenge at hand? So we know already from the question for that one that the situation is that your working styles aren't the same, but give them a little more. What was the challenge? Maybe the challenge is that you couldn't agree on deadlines, or you couldn't agree on colors for a project or font, or you couldn't agree on what room to put someone in if you're working in a hotel or something like that. Whatever it is, scheduling, make sure you give detail about what the challenge was. And then talk about the task. So what goals were you working towards? So in a situation like that, maybe the goal that you're working towards is figuring out the details that you need to move forward with the project or with the schedule or whatever it is. Third is the action. So what did you do to specifically address the challenge? So again, going back to the challenge being the situation. So for that example question of someone who has a different working style than you, how did you connect with them about, some of your differences? How did you communicate with them and find that common ground? How did you figure out what it is that you both needed in order to be the most productive and successful with this project? So what action did you take to make sure that you two could be on the same page to move forward with the work that you were doing? And then of course the result. So what was the outcome and what did you learn? This might seem common sense. Make sure your result is a positive one. And sometimes if you start answering too quickly, you might think like, oh yeah, I remember a time that this happened to me, like I'm going to share that. And then you get halfway or more through your answer and you go, oh, we actually didn't resolve that. Like I forgot that this actually doesn't necessarily have a happy ending. Make sure that you practice some of these answers ahead of time. Try and look at some common behavioral interview questions. Some of the ones that I shared, there's lots of lists that you can find online doing a quick search. Go through them and try and write out some scenarios from your past that you can provide as answers and make sure that you're picking one with good results. So of course, they're looking for what was the outcome. If we go back to that question again of, you were working with someone who had a different working style, how did you handle the situation? Hopefully the situation at the end, the result is that you two were able to figure out your working styles, figure out how to get into a really good rhythm together. And the result was that you finished the project on time. It was received really well. It was a success. What did you learn? Maybe something about how to communicate with that person, how to work better with them, how to think about maybe what's going through their head, different things. Make sure that you are talking about a positive result at the end and being really clear about what you learned, because they're definitely listening for that as well. So prepare and practice, of course, really important. So again, take a look at some common interview questions that, or even think back to some that maybe you stumbled on in past interviews, how could you improve your answer? So become fluent in yourself, become fluent in your experience and the stories that you're sharing and the answers that you're sharing. Practice speaking them out loud. If it's more helpful to write them, definitely write them out. I mean, we're virtual now, of course, so a lot of the times if you're doing virtual interviews, sometimes you can have some notes on the side. Don't be reading them, of course, the entire time, because that can be really distracting and people can tell when you're just reading a script. But have notes for yourself if you need to, and write things down and note questions that you have for them. Create a story for yourself. So work on your personal brand, your your elevator pitch, and make sure that you have something prepared that you can pull from at any time, because you never know when you're going to be chatting with someone, and you need to pull from that and share, who you are, what you've done so far, what you're looking for, what your skills are. So recall specific career accomplishments and achievements, as well as any metrics and data that serve as evidence of those achievements. Numbers are really important as well as part of your story, anytime that you can share them. Research and practice answering common interview questions in writing and out loud to yourself and others. So a really great way to practice as well is to just practice with a peer. So collect a bunch of questions that you want to go through, answer them to the peer, have them take some notes, note anything that maybe is missing in your answer. Definitely refer back to the STAR method. So did you mention the situation? Did you describe it? Did you talk about the task? Did you talk about the action you took? Did you share a result at the end? Was it a positive one? When you're going back and forth with these peers, you can make sure that you're both noting all 4 of the STARs, pieces of the STAR method. So if you're unsure about how to answer common interview questions, of course, ask someone you can trust for guidance, like any career coach or just a peer in the industry. Sometimes there's some really challenging questions that you come across, and it's just in the moment you got to try and get through them, and then after you go, wow, like I've never had that one before, like how can I prepare better for it next time? So take notes for yourself like that, so you know what it is that you need to do to prepare. So some other pro tips include taking notes, of course, having questions prepared. Make sure that during your interview, you're asking questions at the very end. That's so important. Mirror their vocal tone, speed, volume, posture. That can be a little bit more challenging to do, of course, remote when you're doing something like that over Zoom. But do try and take note of that and match it as well. In phone interviews, think about your posture. This might seem kind of weird, but during phone interviews, if you're kind of like slouched, maybe laying in bed, something like that, because you're at home, they can hear if you're a little bit too relaxed or a little bit more relaxed than you would be if you were doing your interview in person. If you need time, ask for it. So I was talking a little bit earlier about seeing questions as opportunity and what to do, how to answer questions that maybe you don't know the answer to. Make sure that you pause before you jump into your answers. So this really helps you to actually collect your thoughts, think about what it is that you want to say before you dive in. Give yourself, 5 seconds. Seems short, maybe, also seems long, maybe if you're sitting there for 5 seconds in silence, but it's so important and so helpful. So during that time, make sure that you just, again, collect your thoughts and then begin your answer. If you try and dive into your answer too soon after they ask the question, you might not actually know what you're saying yet, where you're going with it, and then halfway through you're like, I can't remember where this is going or what the question is. So sometimes that can happen, so definitely take your time. Never use just, so don't devalue yourself. Use I and not we. So if you're talking about, if you're answering some of those behavioral interview questions and you were working on a team, that's totally awesome, but make sure you're talking about what it is that you did. What were you responsible for? So using I as much as you can over we, so that they understand what your role was and what you were responsible for. Going into your interview, make sure that you've done some industry and company research, reference different trends. Don't wait until the end to ask questions. You can try and make it conversational. Show that you're super interested in the role, in the company, in the team, things like that, and make sure you close your interview. And we'll talk about what that looks like shortly. So how do you prepare for interviews? So how to prepare, review the job description and requirements. This you probably would have done when you were actually building your resume and your cover letter to do an application. But going into the interview, make sure that you check it out again, highlight anything that you want to make sure that you talk about, anything that you can relate to the position, to the company. Always try and loop it back to them and talk about how this relates to what they do and what the role would be about. Review your own past experiences, recall any major challenges, events, projects that you can be sharing during your answers, create some sample questions and practice with peers like I talked about, and network and reach out to people who work there. Ask them about their interview and hiring experience. There's a lot of great resources out there where you can actually find some people's reviews of past experiences with their interview. Sometimes they share interview questions that they had, they share how difficult it was, things like that. Or if you can network and reach out to people, then you can learn firsthand what the interview experience was actually like. Probing questions, these are super important and something that you should be doing and something that you'll also sometimes notice interviewers doing. So for example, if you are answering a question for an interviewer and the answer doesn't meet their needs, they might ask you some probing questions. So maybe there's something missing, they didn't quite hear what they wanted to hear, and they want to probe you and see if they can get a little bit more info, dig a little bit deeper into your answer, get a better understanding of your understanding of the situation, of the role, whatever it is that they're asking about. So don't take it as a bad thing if they start asking you like, hey, can you tell me more about that? Well, did you have experience with this? What about this? Whatever it is, this is an opportunity to fill any gaps, and they're providing you with the opportunity to share a little bit more info and dive a little bit deeper into your experience and your knowledge. Not following up with a probing question either means that your answer was perfect. They have no questions. They got everything that they needed out of it and they're ready to move on. Or they might not ask because they're going to let those holes remain in your answer. We don't want this. You don't always know when it's either that the answer is perfect or that they're just going to let it be. But one way that you can kind of check is if you do start to notice this, you can say, did I answer that in enough detail? Would you like another example at the end of your question? So if you kind of get that feeling like, oh, I'm not totally sure if I hit everything they were looking for, ask them, see what they say. When you're closing your interview, you can even straight up ask them something like, based on the answers that I provided today, would you hire me or would you move me to the next round? Feels kind of scary because that's a pretty straightforward and blunt question to be asking them, but it's a great way to figure out like what their thoughts are and like what your chances of moving forward actually look like. So you can ask some of your own probing questions as well. So when you can't answer the question, so if you get a question and you're like, I don't know anything about this, I have no experience with it, what you can say is, I actually don't have experience with this, but here's something similar. Or I don't have experience with this, but here's how I find out the answer and what I would do. So make sure you don't just say, I don't know, that's never happened to me. Maybe it didn't happen to you, and that's okay. We don't all have perfect experience across all responsibilities of every job that we apply to, but interviewers need to understand like what's similar, how would you react in that situation, what can you share that would help us understand how you would react in that situation, or how would you find out the answer if you've never done it before. So who would you seek assistance from, or what kind of learning would you do on your own to understand this new skill or to handle the situation, whatever it is. If it's a technical skill that you don't have, try and get ahead of it. So if you're looking at a job posting and you're going, okay, I've got everything except for like maybe these two technical skills. What you can do is try and get ahead of it, start doing some research, look up some YouTube tutorials, look up some free courses you can take, read up on it, watch some videos. If it's something that you can play around with and try and look at yourself, try out some of that. Look at some of the courses that you can take to develop these specific skills. And then when you get into your interview and they ask you what your skill level looks like, it's okay if you say, I just started learning it. I just started taking a look at it. This is what I know so far. I'm really interested in learning it. So let them know that like, yeah, maybe I'm not like perfect at this skill that you're asking for, but I've already taken the initiative to start learning it. I'm already taking a look into it. It's something that I want to master and have on my resume and be able to bring to this company. And this is all of the steps that I'm taking in order to actually master it and be able to learn it and use it. So a couple of different things that you can do there to get ahead. Once your interview is over, you want to close your interview. So prepare questions to ask at the end. Again, try and make these pretty company and role specific. Ask about the team. You can ask about onboarding, especially if it's a remote position. What does that look like for the company? Think about what it is that you want to learn from these interviewers and the panel so that you have a good understanding of what the team would look like, what the company would look like. As much as it's important for them to think that you're a great fit, you want to make sure that the company is a good fit for you as well. So ask a lot of questions to show your interest in the company, show your interest in the role, and also figure out if it's somewhere you actually want to work. Thank them for their time. Say, I appreciate the opportunity to meet and learn more about the position. Make sure you ask what the next steps are so that when you're leaving your interview for the day, you know what to look forward to and what to look out for. And then based on you can say something like, based on the answers that I provided, is there anything else that you would like to know about myself or my experience? Is there anything I haven't spoken about that makes you think I may not be a good fit? Again, kind of a big question to ask, can be pretty nerve-wracking, but this is a great way to figure out like what they think about your interview, about your skills, about your application, and where you might be going from there. So again, make sure that you follow up. So try and follow up within 24 hours of your interview, send a thank you note and restate your interest in the role. If you don't hear back from them, don't worry too much about it. If you don't hear back from them about next steps within a week or two, feel free to follow up again. If you're really interested in the role, do make sure that you reach out and you continue to try and keep in contact with them. With, of course, like not every single day, but definitely 24 hours after your first interview. And then if you haven't heard from them and they've given you a timeline, feel free to reach out again and see where things are at. So some things to remember for us. So prepare and practice. So take a look at some sample questions online, ask people in the industry what kind of questions they were asked when they were being interviewed for different companies in different roles. There's lots of reviews of different interviews at different companies online that you can find some common interview questions, especially behavioral ones that you can go through. Those ones can be really challenging to answer because remember your STAR method. You want to make sure that you're hitting the situation, the task, the action, and the result every time you answer that question. So it's great to have some of those answers prepared ahead of time for yourself. Be concise and don't ramble. This can be challenging. Maybe time yourself. If you know that you're someone that starts to talk quite a bit during your answers, that's okay. But try and limit yourself to make sure that you're not going kind of past 2 to 3 minutes, I would even say. That can feel pretty long in itself. It doesn't have to be 2 to 3 minutes, but I would say don't expand past that unless they're asking some of those probing questions and they want to learn more from you. Listen and respond accordingly. Never respond with "I don't know" or "it never happened to me." Make sure that you're either letting them know that you would find the answer or compare it to a similar situation that you can share your experience with. Don't speak poorly about past and present employers or coworkers. Don't falsify your answer. Make sure to close the interview and, of course, make sure to follow up. So, super important to remember how to prepare for these questions. Again, I definitely recommend for everybody to take a look online and see what it is that they can find, what kind of questions they struggle with, and how to respond to them. That can be really helpful in preparing for your interview and with helping bring some of those nerves down. Again, something else to note is that if you are someone, because I always notice myself doing this when I talk about behavioral interviews, if you're someone that fidgets a lot, try and find a way for yourself to keep that out of camera. I watch my own hand come in and out of the screen. That I know that can be distracting for some people, and it can be distracting during interviews too. Or if you have habits like saying too often and you're not sure how to eliminate that, I recommend just taking a pause and taking a breath instead. It might be kind of quiet and you might notice that instead, and that can be a little uncomfortable to start, but it's a little bit better than starting every answer with before you get into it. So if there's any kind of like little habits that you notice for yourself that you need help with, trying to eliminate or trying to figure out what do I do with them, note them and then try and see what you can do instead during those times. But that is all from me in terms of our behavioral interviews. If there's any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Please feel free to connect with me and send me a message if you do have any questions or if you want any more tips on behavioral interviews. But thanks so much for joining today. Do you recommend any YouTube channel? Not any specific one. Is there a specific topic that you're looking to learn about? Like, is it a YouTube channel for, say, career coaching or development or anything like that that you're looking for? For interviews. Oh, interesting. No, I wouldn't say that there's a specific one that I work with or use. There is a site called Interview Stream that is a pretty good resource. I think you can get free access to it for like a little bit. But what you can do is actually it'll ask you some questions and then a video records your answer and then you can play it back and review it to yourself. So if you want to practice, I would say doing that. YouTube, I'm really not sure, but I know, yeah, no problem. Glassdoor is also a great one where you can review past interviews and reviews from people at different companies. So I would recommend checking that out and seeing what people say there too. Yeah, any other questions from anyone? LinkedIn Premium is some good interview preparation tools. Yeah, that as well. Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Perfect. Cool. Well, are there any questions from anyone else? Again, please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, and thanks so much for joining me today. No problem. Thanks, Brandy. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so Amanda, just saw your question about, do you have any suggestions on how to bring up a disability you may have if you are deciding to disclose it? So when you're looking at job postings, companies will put, and you might have seen this already, they will put a disclosure that if you need any accommodations or anything like that for your interview, you can disclose it and they'll make those accommodations for you. Even if you don't need accommodations, if there's something that you just want to disclose to them and let them know about, you can do so before the interview, and that's totally fine. I definitely recommend looking out for that like verbiage in the job posting so that you're sure like this is a company that is really clear about what their stance is around supporting those with disabilities, so that you know what kind of accommodations are available to you and what they would do for you on the job as well. So just in an email back to them or over the phone, however it is, just being clear about, you know, this is what I am working with and this is what I have. I'd like to disclose. If you need accommodations, request that, but definitely look out. I mean, every company is to accommodate for that, but just being upfront and clear about it is the best way as soon as you'd like to. Yeah, no problem. Awesome. Well, thank you again, everyone. For those of you who are still here, again, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. It was awesome getting to chat with some of you today and go through behavioral interviews. We are a few minutes past our time, so I'm going to end our session. But again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out